"Soft," the man said, loud enough for the cameras to catch it, and he reached out and pressed 2 fingers into my sentry's forearm the way a butcher tests a cut of meat. "Desk job arms. Look at this, a parade ornament. You hold a rifle and you stand still. My grandmother holds her shopping and stands in line. Same job." I was standing 15 feet away, off the cordon line, in the plain dark coat I wear when I am the officer of the watch and not a man anyone is meant to notice, and I felt the whole charity demonstration tilt around that one word. Soft. The crowd laughed because he wanted them to. The man knew how to make a crowd laugh. It was, in a manner of speaking, his trade. I will not give you his real name, because in this household we do not give the famous the gift of their names when they behave like that. Call him the Strongman. He was a visiting celebrity, flown in for the afternoon as the headline draw of a fundraiser the palace hosted every year for the soldiers' families' fund. A long forecourt strung with bunting, a roped arena of sawdust and timber, and a row of strongman apparatus brought in on a flatbed. The great stones, the yoke, the iron logs, the deadlift bar loaded like a freight axle. He had a chest like a barrel and a beard he kept oiled for the lenses, and he had spent the morning lifting things and grinning at the applause. And somewhere around noon, he had grown bored of the applause and gone looking for someone to stand next to who could not lift anything at all. He found my sentry. Of course he did. The contrast was the joke before he even opened his mouth. His name was Vance. Lance Sergeant Vance on the cathedral gate that week, reassigned to the demonstration cordon for the afternoon because the fund liked to have a guardsman in full ceremonial dress near the arena. The red wool tunic, the tall black bearskin, the white gloves, the medals, the rifle held at the order, the chin strap cutting a line across a face that did not move. Vance was tall but not wide. Lean through the shoulder. Next to the strongman he looked, I will be honest, like a lamppost next to a furnace. That was the picture the strongman wanted, and that was the picture the phones in the crowd were already drinking. "You want to know the difference between us?" the strongman went on, walking a slow circle around Vance, playing to the lenses. "I built something, I trained, I bled, I broke records. You inherited a costume. Tell me, could you lift one of those stones, just one, the little one?" He pointed at the row of atlas stones, smallest to largest, each one rounded and chalk white and heavy as a man. "I'll bet the fund 1,000 you can't get the little one to your knee." Vance did not look at him. Vance looked at the middle distance over the heads of the crowd, the way we are trained to, the way that makes the untrained think there is nothing behind the eyes. There is always something behind the eyes. I have stood that post myself, years of it, and I can tell you the stillness is not emptiness. It is a held breath that lasts a career. I should have stepped in then. A part of me wanted to. But here is the thing I had learned in 20 years of watching men test my guardsmen. The cordon is a kind of stage, and the worst thing an officer can do is rush it. Rush it, and you make the guardsman a victim to be rescued. Hold, and you let the man dig. So I held, and the strongman dug. "Nothing," he laughed and turned to the crowd, arms wide. "See, this is what I'm saying, all show. The realm pays for the haircut and the brass, and there's nothing underneath it. No offense, son." He clapped Vance on the shoulder hard, the kind of clap that is meant to look friendly on camera and land like a shove in the body. Vance's bearskin did not so much as shiver. "No offense, but if you ever want to know what a real man's arms can do, you watch me at 3 o'clock. I'm pulling the truck." That got a cheer. The afternoon's grand finale was the strongman harnessed to a decommissioned fire appliance, dragging it the length of a marked lane for the cameras and the cause. It was a genuine feat. I will not pretend it wasn't. The man was, whatever else he was, strong. But I want you to understand what was happening underneath the joke, because the joke is not the story. The story is the thing the strongman could not see, standing nose to nose with it. I knew Vance's file. An officer of the watch knows his men's files better than the men think, not just the postings and the marksmanship scores, but the lives folded up inside them before the uniform. and folded up inside Lance Sergeant Vance's file, in a section he had asked, quietly, on the day he enlisted, never to be mentioned on parade, was a fact that would have made the strongman put his old beard away and go very still. Vance had, in another life, under another name the sports pages once shouted, held a national record in exactly the discipline the strongman had built his fame on. Not a club record, not a regional one. A national mark, set on a cold morning 8 years before, in front of a different kind of crowd, the kind that knows the weight of a bar to the half-kilo and goes silent when a man chalks his hands. He had been, for 1 year of his young life, the man the country pointed at when it wanted to say that is what strength looks like. And then he had walked away from all of it, taken a name that was only his own and not the headlines, and asked to stand a gate where no one would ever recognize him. Because, as he put it to me once, the only time he ever spoke of it, the record was the loudest thing I ever did, sir, and I was tired of being loud. So I stood off the cordon and I watched a famous man press his fingers into the forearm of a former national record holder and call it soft, and I felt the strange, slow, righteous patience that I have come to recognize as the best part of this job. It was going to be a good afternoon. The strongman did not know it yet. He thought he was the strongest man in the forecourt. He was about to be corrected, and the beauty of it, the part I have replayed 100 times since, was that Vance was going to do the correcting without breaking a single rule of his post. 3 o'clock, the strongman called over his shoulder, sauntering back toward the arena and the loaded bar. Come watch, Ornament, bring a notepad. Vance's eyes did not move, but I was close enough to see the corner of his jaw set, not in anger, in something older than anger, in the quiet of a man who has decided. And then a girl in the front row, maybe 9 years old, holding her father's hand, looked up at the strongman's broad retreating back and then over at the still red figure on the cordon, and she said, in the clear, carrying voice that only children have, but the soldier's not even trying, maybe he's just being polite. The crowd laughed again, gently this time, and the strongman waved it off. But I saw Vance's gloved hand tighten the smallest fraction on the rifle, and I knew then that the afternoon had just found its hinge. Let me tell you how the demonstration was supposed to go, so you understand how far off the rails it ran. The fund's organizer, a brisk, kind woman named Mrs. Adair, who had run the Soldiers' Families Fund for 30 years and had buried more friends in uniform than she would ever say, had built the afternoon as a simple thing. A guardsman on the cordon for dignity, a row of apparatus for spectacle, a famous strongman to draw a crowd whose ticket money went to widows and orphans. Children would gawk, donations would climb. At 3, the truck pull would cap it, the cameras would get their clip, the strongman would fly home, and the fund would be richer for it. The fund was the only reason any of us tolerated him. I want to be clear about that. We did not host the strongman because we admired him. We hosted him because somewhere in a small house with a folded flag on the mantel, a woman who had lost her husband to the service needed the money his name brought through the gate. That is the math of charity, and it is not pretty, and the men who do the quiet work of it learn to swallow a great deal. Vance had been swallowing all morning. I had watched the strongman work the forecourt for 2 hours before he found my sentry. He was, in his way, a professional. He knew exactly how much contempt a crowd would applaud, and exactly when to pull it back to a grin. He had lifted the iron log overhead and roared. He had carried the yoke down the lane with the great plates swinging. He had hoisted the smallest atlas stone to his shoulder and held it there while the children screamed. Every feat was real. Every feat was loud. And after every one he turned to the lenses and said some version of the same thing. This is what a real man can do. This is what your soft world has forgotten. It played. I will not pretend it didn't. There is an appetite in a crowd for a man who says the unsayable thing, who points at the disciplined and the dutiful and calls them soft, who flatters the watching with the suggestion that strength is loud and rare and theirs to admire from a safe distance. The strongman fed that appetite all morning, and the appetite fed him back, and by noon he had mistaken the applause for the truth. Then he found a still red figure on a cordon, and he decided to make him the punchline. He came back to Vance twice more before 3. I marked each one. The first time he brought a microphone, a stage hand trailed him with a boom, and he stood in front of Vance and conducted what he plainly thought was a comedy interview. Tell the people about your training regimen, soldier. Walk us through leg day. Vance said nothing, eyes forward. The strongman supplied both halves of the conversation in a high mocking voice and a low one, and the crowd tittered, and I watched Mrs. Adair's mouth go thin and hard at the edge of the arena. The second time he brought a stone. The smallest one, the loading stone, perhaps 120 pounds of chalk-rounded concrete, rolled by 2 of his hands to the very edge of the cordon, in front of Vance's boots, with the whole forecourt now turned to watch. Last chance ornament, the strongman said, and he was grinning, but his eyes had something meaner in them now, the meanness of a man who has built a fortune on a crowd's attention and cannot bear a single person in the square refusing to give it. Lift it. Knee height, that's all. Prove there's a man under the costume. Do it for the children, they want to believe in you. He gestured at the girl in the front row, the one who had wondered aloud if the soldier was just being polite. Don't let her down. It was a cruel little trap, and I have to give him credit for the architecture of it. If Vance lifted the stone, he broke his post. A guardsman on ceremonial duty does not perform party tricks for a celebrity, and the discipline that makes the uniform mean anything would crack on camera. If Vance did not lift it, the strongman's whole thesis stood proved. All show, nothing underneath. Either way, the famous man won the afternoon. He had backed a disciplined man into the one corner where discipline looked like weakness. And here is where you learn what kind of soldier Lance Sergeant Vance was. He did not lift the stone. He did not even look at it. He stood his post exactly as the regulations of that post required, eyes forward, rifle at the order, every line of him a sentence in a language the strongman could not read, and he let the trap close on empty air. Because the trap only worked if Vance believed, even for a second, that the famous man's opinion of him was a thing worth answering. And Vance, who had once been the loudest strong man in the country and had walked away from the noise of it on purpose, did not. I saw the strong man's grin falter, just for a beat. It is a particular thing to watch a man who lives on reaction discover that he is shouting at a wall and that the wall is winning the crowd. Because the crowd had begun, slowly, to feel the contrast turn. A child had named it first. Maybe he's just being polite. And now, watching the still red figure decline to be baited, watching dignity simply outlast contempt, a few of the grown-ups in the forecourt were beginning to feel faintly ashamed of having laughed. Fine, the strong man said, too loud, recovering his grin and rolling the stone back with his foot. Suit yourself. 3 o'clock, the truck. We'll see who's soft. He stalked back to the arena, and I made a decision. I walked to the gatehouse, the small stone office at the edge of the forecourt where the fund kept its papers and its trophy case, and I found Mrs. Adair already there, arms folded, watching the monitor that fed the demonstration cameras. She did not turn around. That man, she said, is going to spend my whole afternoon making my guardsman into a joke, and the clip of it will be everywhere by supper. I have widows depending on this day, Major. I needed his name. I did not need this. I know, I said. Can you move Vance off the cordon? Give him a quieter post. I won't have one of your men humiliated for my fund. And that was the moment I had to decide whether to tell her what was in the file. I want to be careful here because it matters. Vance had asked on the day he enlisted that the record never be spoken of on parade. It was a request I had honored for 8 years. He did not want to be the famous strong man in a soldier's coat. He wanted to be a soldier. To pull the file out now, to wave his old glory at a celebrity, would be to do to Vance exactly what the strong man had been doing to him all day, to reduce him to a feat, to a number, to a clip. The whole point of Vance's stillness was that he was more than the loudest thing he had ever done. So I did not tell her the number. I told her something truer. "Don't move him," I said, "and don't worry about the clip. I've watched a great many men try to make my guardsmen into jokes, Mrs. Adair. The cameras always think they know which man is strong. They're usually wrong. Let it run." She looked at me for a long moment, the way a woman who has buried soldiers looks at a man asking her to trust him. Then she nodded once and turned back to the monitor. Behind her, on the trophy case shelf, sat a thing I had forgotten was even there. A thing that was, in about 90 minutes, going to win the afternoon without Vance lifting so much as a finger. A record board, the fund's own, and the strongman in his vanity was about to read it aloud to the crowd himself. Let me explain the board, because it is the whole hinge of what came next. The Soldiers' Families Fund had run a charity strongman day every year for longer than I had been in service. And every year the apparatus came out, and ordinary men, soldiers mostly off-duty, and a few brave guests from the crowd took turns trying the lifts for a donation, and the best marks of the day got their names painted onto a long varnished board that hung in the gatehouse. It was a humble thing. The numbers on it were honest numbers, soldier numbers, the kind a fit man might manage on a good day. The deadlift column, the stone-to-shoulder column, the truck pull time over the marked lane. And at the very top of the board, in older paint, faded a little now, was a single line that had stood untouched for 8 years. A name I knew, a mark no soldier since had come within 50 pounds of. The fund had stopped expecting anyone to, and had taken to treating that top line as a kind of legend. A high water mark from a year, a real champion had quietly shown up to a charity day, and lifted for the widows and then gone away again without making a fuss about it. Mrs. Adair had told me the story herself once, years ago, never connecting it to the lean lance sergeant on her cordon because she had no reason to. "Loveliest thing," she'd said. "This young man came one year, terribly polite, wouldn't be photographed, pulled the truck in a time we've never matched, signed the board and donated his whole appearance fee back to the fund. Didn't want a word said. I never even got his proper name." She'd patted the board. "I keep his line up there to remind the boys what's possible." The name painted on that top line was not the name Lance Sergeant Vance wore now. It was the name the sports pages had once shouted. And Mrs. Adair, dear woman, had been hanging it over her gatehouse door for 8 years, without ever knowing that the polite young man who said it and the still red guardsman a celebrity was mocking on her cordon were the same person. I knew. I had known the moment I read his file, and I had kept my mouth shut for 8 years because that was the promise. But the strongman was about to read that board out loud. Because that is what men like the strongman do at 3 o'clock, harnessed to his truck, with the cameras rolling and the crowd his. He was going to want a number to beat. He was going to want to set an asterisk record on the fund's board, in front of everyone. So the clip would say not just asterisk famous man pulls truck, but famous man breaks the record. And the only record on the board worth breaking was the faded top line. I did not have to do anything at all. I only had to let the afternoon run. The man who had spent all day calling a hidden champion soft was going to walk up to a board, read a champion's mark, and try to beat it, not knowing the champion was standing 40 feet away in a red coat, watching, holding a rifle at the order, perfectly still. At 2:45, the stage hands wheeled out the truck. It was the old fire appliance, drum red and heavy, its tank emptied but its engine block and its great steel ladder still aboard, the whole thing built like an anvil on wheels. They ran out the harness, a thick padded shoulder rig on a long tow line, and chalked the start and finish of the lane down the center of the forecourt. 30 yards of cobblestone the strongman would have to drag it across. The crowd pressed to the ropes. The girl in the front row sat up on her father's shoulders. And the strongman came out stripped to a singlet, beard oiled, chalked to the elbows, soaking up the noise. He grabbed the microphone himself. Before I pull this beautiful machine for these beautiful people and this beautiful cause, he boomed, and the crowd cheered the word cause the way crowds do. I'm told there's a little record board in that gatehouse. The fund's own little hall of fame. He grinned. Let's make today historic. Bring it out. I want my name at the top before I fly home. And so 2 stage hands carried the long varnished board out and propped it on an easel beside the lane, turned to the cameras, and the strongman strode over to read his future conquest. I moved to the edge of the ropes. I could see Vance from there, still on the cordon, 20 feet from the easel, his eyes forward, giving no sign that the board now in plain view carried a line that was, in the truest sense, his own. I could see the back of his neck above the tunic collar. I have learned to read a guardsman by the back of his neck when his face is forbidden to me. Vance's was calm, calmer, if anything, than it had been all day. The strongman ran a thick finger down the columns, narrating for the lenses. Deadlift if soldier numbers cute, stones cute. Truck pull 30 yards, let's see the best time, that's the one that matters, that's the one I'm. His finger stopped, at the top line, the faded one. And I watched a famous man go quiet. I was too far to read the number from where I stood, but I did not need to. I had read it in a file 8 years before, and it had stayed with me the way certain numbers do. I watched the strongman read it once, and then read it again, and then look up at the camera with the first genuinely uncertain expression I had seen on his face all day, and then read it a third time as though the paint might rearrange itself into something he could believe. That's, he laughed, but it came out wrong. That's a typo. Nobody pulls this truck in that. That's a misprint. Whose is? He squinted at the name. Who is this? And Mrs. Adair, who had come out to stand by the easel with her arms folded, said in a voice that carried beautifully across the suddenly attentive forecourt, "That's the loveliest young man who ever came to my fund. Set that mark 8 years ago, donated his fee, and wouldn't let me photograph him. National champion, somebody told me afterward. I never did learn what became of him." She said it to the strongman, but I saw her glance just for an instant at the still red figure on the cordon, not because she had guessed even then, but because Vance was simply the nearest soldier, and she was a woman who looked to soldiers. She did not know. She could not have known. But the strongman, holding the microphone, looking at a record he suddenly was not sure he could break, on a board he had demanded be brought out for his glory, in front of a crowd he had spent all day teaching to admire raw strength. The strongman was about to learn the answer to his own question, and the answer was standing 40 feet away, holding a rifle, soft desk job arms and all, declining to give him the satisfaction of a single glance. A vain man cornered does not retreat, he doubles. The strongman put the board out of his mind. You could see him decide to, and announce to the cameras that records were made to be broken, that he would not just beat the old mark but shatter it, and he shrugged into the harness with the chalk smoking off his shoulders. The stage hand set the tow line. A man with a stopwatch took his place at the finished chalk. The crowd began to clap in rhythm. I will tell you honestly, the man could pull a truck. He set his feet, he drove, the great red appliance groaned and rolled. The tow line went bar tight and trembled, and the cobbles took the weight of 3 tons of iron grinding forward by inches. His face purpled. The veins stood out on his neck like cords. It was a genuine display of enormous strength, and the crowd roared for it, and somewhere a child screamed with delight, and the truck crawled down the lane. But a truck pull is not only strength. It is strength shaped by craft, the angle of the lean, the rhythm of the leg drive, the discipline to keep the line from snatching, the refusal to waste a single foot-pound on theater. The strongman pulled like a man performing strength rather than spending it. He roared. He flung his head. He played to the lenses between drives, and every time he played to the lenses the truck slowed, because a truck does not care about the cameras. The truck only cares whether you are pulling it. He crossed the finished chalk to a wall of applause, dropped to his knees in the harness, threw his arms wide, and the crowd loved him for it. Then the man with the stopwatch leaned in and murmured something, and the stage hand carried the murmur to the easel and chalked the time onto the board beneath the faded line. The new time was good. It was a strong man's time. It was nowhere near the faded line above it. He had not broken the record. He had not come within a dozen seconds of it. On the fund's own humble board, in front of the cameras he had summoned for his coronation, the famous strongman's name now sat in fresh chalk, a full hand's width below a faded line set 8 years before by a polite young man who would not be photographed. The clapping faltered as the crowd did the arithmetic. The strongman read the board, read his own time, read the gap, and the grin came off his face like paint in the rain. "The track's wrong," he said into the microphone, and his voice had lost its boom. "These cobbles the truck's loaded heavier than that old time's a misprint. I told you nobody." "It's not a misprint." Mrs. Adair's voice again, clear and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had spent 30 years declining to be bullied by large men. "I watched him set it. The truck was heavier that year. We hadn't drained the tank. He pulled it in the rain, and he didn't say one word about it afterward. He just signed the board and went home." The strongman turned on her, and for one ugly second I thought he would say something to a woman who ran a widow's fund that he could never take back. The forecourt held its breath. I took a step toward the ropes. But before I could move, before the strongman could open his mouth, the girl in the front row, up on her father's shoulders, pointing, said the thing that turned the whole afternoon on its hinge. "Why is the soldier crying?" Every head in the forecourt followed her small pointing finger, to the cordon, to the still red figure in the bearskin, to Lance Sergeant Vance. He was not crying. Guardsmen do not cry on post, and Vance least of all. But the child had seen something real, the way children do, that the still red soldier who had not moved a muscle through 2 hours of mockery, who had let a stone be rolled to his boots and declined to look at it, who had given a famous man nothing all day, was now looking. Not at the strongman, at the board, at the faded top line and the name painted there in old paint. And his eyes, I was close enough now to see his face, and I will carry this part of it for the rest of my service. His eyes were bright. Not with hurt, not with pride, with something quieter and harder to name. The look of a man seeing his own younger self, the loud one, the one he had walked away from, hung up on a wall over a gatehouse door for 8 years and treated by a kind woman as a legend. While he, the man that boy had become, stood guard beneath it in honest anonymity and asked for nothing. I understood in that moment why Vance had never once been tempted to lift the strongman's stone. It was not stubbornness. It was that he had already done all of it. He had been to the top of the loudest version of strength there is, and he had found at the top of it only more noise, and he had come down and chosen this instead, the cold gate, the still hours, the rifle at the order, the strength that is spent quietly on duty and asks for no applause. The strongman thought soft meant weak. Vance knew that the hardest thing a strong man ever lifts is his own need to be seen lifting it. But the crowd did not know any of that. The crowd only knew that a famous man had failed to beat a faded line, and that a still soldier was looking at the line with bright eyes, and the two facts were beginning, in the slow way a crowd thinks, to want to be connected. The strongman saw it too. He looked from the board to the cordon to the board again, and a terrible suspicion began to dawn in his face. The suspicion of a man who has spent all day pressing his fingers into an arm and calling it soft, and is only now wondering exactly whose arm it was. "Who," he said into the microphone, very slowly, looking now directly at Vance, "are you?" And Mrs. Adair, following his eyes at last, finally seeing the lean shoulders and the polite stillness, and the bright eyes fixed on a name she had hung up 8 years before, Mrs. Adair put one hand over her mouth. "I made my decision then, not to waive the file. Vance would have hated that, and he had earned better. I would let the man tell it, or not tell it, as he chose. But the question had been asked in front of everyone, and a guardsman does not lie, and I would not let my sergeant be the only silent man in a forecourt full of people now staring at him. I stepped over the rope and walked into the open, and the cameras swung to the man in the plain dark coat, and I raised my hand for quiet, and I got it. "You asked who he is," I said to the strong man. "He's the soldier you've been calling soft all afternoon, and I think the board has just introduced you, but it's his name. So if anyone's going to say it out loud," I turned to the cordon lance sergeant. "You're relieved from the silence of your post for exactly 1 minute. That's an order. The rest is yours." For a long moment Vance did not move, and I wondered if he would simply decline, stay silent, stay still, let the board speak, and give the famous man nothing even now. It would have been the most Vance thing in the world. But then he shifted the rifle, grounded it, and turned his head, and for the first time all day Lance Sergeant Vance looked the strongman full in the face. When he spoke, his voice was low and even and carried no triumph at all. "That is the part I want you to hear. There was no triumph in it. That's my name on the top of your board," he said. "The old paint. I set that mark 8 years ago, on the day Mrs. Adair's tank wasn't drained and it rained all morning. I pulled it heavier and wetter than you pulled it today, and I beat your time by the better part of a minute, and I was 23 years old." He paused. "I'm not telling you that to win. I'm telling you because you asked, and because a soldier doesn't lie on his own post." The forecourt had gone so quiet I could hear the bunting snap in the wind. "I held a national record in your sport," Vance went on, still level, still without heat. "For 1 year my name was the one they pointed at, and I gave it back. I put down the chalk and I picked up this." He touched the rifle once with 2 gloved fingers, the same gesture, I realized, that the strong man had used on his forearm that morning, returned now without malice and without need. "You spent today telling these people that strength is a loud thing. That it's a thing you do where the cameras can see it. I used to believe that. I was very good at it. And then one morning I stood at the top of all that noise, and I understood that the loudest strength I had was also the smallest, because it was only ever for me." He looked out at the crowd then, at the children, at the widows the day was meant for, at Mrs. Adair with her hand still over her mouth. "The strength that matters," he said, "is the kind nobody claps for. It's a man standing a cold gate at 3 in the morning so other men can sleep. It's lifting a thing every single day that you're never allowed to set down in front of nobody for people you'll never meet. That's heavier than your truck. I've pulled both. I know." And then Lance Sergeant Vance did the thing that ended the afternoon. The thing that I have told to every recruit I have trained since. The thing that made a forecourt full of strangers fall completely silent, and then, slowly, begin to weep and then to cheer. He picked up his rifle, came back to attention and turned his eyes forward again. Back to the post, back to the silence. His minute was over and he had spent it not to humble a famous man, but to honor the work the famous man could not see. He gave the strong man nothing more, no glare, no last word, no victory lap. He simply went back to being a soldier, which is to say, he went back to being the strongest thing in the forecourt by becoming, once more, the stillest. The strong man stood in his harness in the middle of the lane and did not say anything for a long time. The cameras waited. The crowd waited. And I watched a vain man have, perhaps for the first time in a long while, an honest thought. I will give him this, and it is more than I expected to be able to give him. He did not bluster. He did not call it a misprint again. He took the microphone and he looked at the board and he looked at the still red figure on the cordon and he said, into the silence, the only thing that could have saved his afternoon. "I came here today," he said slowly, "to show you all what a strong man looks like." He swallowed. "I think I just found out I was pointing at the wrong soldier." He pulled off the harness, walked to the easel and stood in front of the board a moment longer. Then he turned to Mrs. Adair. "My appearance fee," he said. "The whole thing, to the fund." And he glanced at the cordon and something that was almost shame and almost respect crossed his face. "Tell him I said the truck was heavier than it looked. He'll know what I mean." The crowd did not cheer the strong man's strength after that. They cheered something better. They cheered the moment a loud man got quiet enough to learn the thing the quiet man had known for 8 years. And the clip that went everywhere by supper was not famous man pulls truck. It was a still red soldier touching his rifle and saying, "That's heavier than your truck. I've pulled both," and a forecourt of strangers learning, all at once, what they had been mistaking for soft. I walked over to the cordon when the crowd had thinned and the cameras had gone. I stood beside my sergeant for a while and watched the stage hands wheel the truck away. "You all right?" I asked him low. "Yes, sir," eyes forward. "You didn't have to say it. The board would have done it for you." "I know, sir." A pause. "But he asked, and I'd rather be the one who tells the truth about who I was than let a board do it." A man should be able to look at his old self. His eyes went, just for a flicker, to the faded line and say his name without flinching. I'd been not saying it for 8 years. Turns out the not saying was a kind of flinching too. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I think about it still. We left the board where it was. Mrs. Adair wanted to add Vance's current name to the bottom line, the truck pull he never did that day, and Vance asked her politely, the way he asked everything, to leave it. "The boy who set the top line earned it," he said. "Let him keep it. I'm a different soldier now. I lift different things." She left it. But she had a small brass plate made and fixed it to the easel beneath the faded line, and it did not give his name, because he asked it not to, and it said only this: "Set by a man who came back and stood guard beneath it, and never once mentioned it." I have stood in that gatehouse and read those words more times than I can count. Vance is still in the service. He stands a quiet gate to this day, lean as a lamppost, and the new recruits who do not know the story look at him and see, I am sure, a parade ornament. Soft desk job arms. A man who holds a rifle and stands still. They have no idea. And he would not have it any other way, because the whole of it, the entire lesson of that loud afternoon, was that the strongest man in the forecourt was the one who had nothing left to prove, and knew it, and stood his post in the cold and asked for nobody's applause. The strongman, I heard, changed his act. They tell me he visits fundraisers now and pulls his trucks and lifts his stones, but he ends every show the same way, pointing at whatever soldier or nurse or tired working man is nearest the front, and telling the crowd that that's what a strong man looks like, and most of them don't understand why his voice catches when he says it. I think I do. I have watched a great many men try to make my guardsmen into jokes. The cameras always think they know which man is strong. They are usually wrong, and the truth that famous man learned on my forecourt, the truth I have tried to teach every recruit since, is the one Lance Sergeant Vance carried into the silence and never set down. The loudest strength a man ever has is the one he can finally afford to be quiet about.